At the charity gala, my daughter lifted her glass and said, "To the man who taught me everything about success, my real father, Charles Mallory." And I stood there holding the check that funded her dream, realizing she just buried me alive in front of 500 millionaires. That line, her words still echo every time I close my eyes. You see, the ballroom lights at the Waldorf never dimmed that night. They burned hot, white, merciless. Chandeliers glittered like judgment, and the orchestra kept playing as if nothing sacred had just been broken in front of them. Lydia stood at the center of it all, my daughter radiant in a silver gown that must have cost more than my first workshop. The dress hugged her frame like money hugs power. Ethan, her husband, stood beside her, his hand resting proudly on her back as though he owned the moment. And maybe in that world, he did. When she said my real father, the crowd laughed politely, clinking champagne flutes. But I didn't laugh. I just stared at the crystal glass in my hand, filled with still water, because I no longer drank, and wondered how a heart could make such a sound when it cracked quietly. For context, my name is Brian Hale. I'm 72 years old. I built Hale Engineering with my bare hands, starting from a rusted shed behind my house in Newark. I designed steel frames for bridges that still hold the weight of this city. For 40 years, I worked double shifts, saved every cent, and raised a daughter who once used to bring me lemonade while I welded. I funded her education, her first apartment in Boston, her start in public relations. I gave her the freedom I never had. I thought that was love. But to her, love must have looked like diamonds under ballroom light. At that charity gala, supposedly in her name, every table was wrapped in white roses and mirrored glass. Mallory Group logos floated above the stage like banners from a kingdom I'd never belonged to. Lydia was the queen of the evening, raising millions for small business development, though the check that made the event possible came from me. $250,000. A quiet donation. Anonymous. Meant to give her credibility. Now that check sat folded in my inner pocket like a secret I was ashamed of. Charles Mallory, her father-in-law, stood tall beside her. 60-something tan from golf trips, wearing a tuxedo that cost what my old truck was worth. He smiled at her like she was his own blood, and maybe that's what hurt most. She let him. She smiled back with gratitude I hadn't seen in years. The photographers loved them. The crowd adored them. And I, the man who'd given her life, her education, her platform, was a footnote at the back of the room. But I didn't walk out. I stood there and watched her toast, the laughter, the flashbulbs, the exchange of hollow affection disguised as glamour. Because sometimes you don't run from betrayal. You witness it, so you'll never forget how it looked when the lights were on. When the band struck up another song, I set my untouched drink on the nearest table and left quietly through the service corridor. No one noticed. Not even my daughter. On the cold night drive back across the bridge, the city skyline shimmered towers of glass built on ambition. I had helped design some of those skeletons years ago, iron bones hidden beneath their vanity. And I realized something chilling. I had built my daughter the same way, strong on the outside, hollow at the core. That realization burned deeper than any public humiliation. It wasn't just about being replaced. It was about seeing the mirror image of my own mistakes, what I'd raised, when I worshipped success more than gratitude. Before I turned into my street, I whispered under my breath, "Lord, if there's still something left to fix, show me how to begin." Because some betrayals don't end in ballrooms, they begin there. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this story from? 3 weeks before that gala, she'd come home. Not the penthouse kind of home she lived in now, the real one. The brick house in New Jersey I'd built with my own hands 40 years ago, back when her mother still planted marigolds by the porch. That afternoon, I heard the sound of tires crunching gravel, then a car door closing with precision. I looked out the window and saw a silver Bentley parked beside my old Ford pickup, 2 worlds colliding in the driveway. When Lydia walked in, she brought the smell of luxury perfume and winter air. The kind of scent that doesn't belong in a workshop or a kitchen with chipped counters. Her coat, cashmere cream-colored, shimmered in the weak sunlight. She looked beautiful. Cold, but beautiful. "Dad," she said, brushing invisible dust from the couch before sitting down. "I don't have much time. There's something important I need you to sign." She placed a manila folder on the coffee table like a contract between 2 enemies forced to be polite. Inside, legal documents transferring 30% of Hale Engineering's ownership to her. I stared at the papers, then at her. 30%, for what purpose? She smiled that corporate smile that used to charm investors when she was just starting out. For efficiency. "Mallory Group wants to help us expand, merge my PR work with your production brand. But they'll only invest if I'm on the company registry as a major shareholder. You'd still have full control, Dad. This is just a formality." A formality. I'd heard that word before from banks, lawyers, partners who said the same thing before taking more than they earned. I leaned back in my chair. "You know, this business is my life's work. I built it from steel and sweat, not signatures." She sighed, long, theatrical. "You always say that. But times have changed, Dad. People like the Mallorys can scale things in months that would take you decades. This could finally put our name on the map." "Our name," I repeated quietly, tracing the company logo embossed on the folder. My name. Her mother's name. The name that had kept food on our table and her college paid for. She reached for my hand, her diamond bracelet clinking against her watch. "Dad, please. Trust me. I'm not taking anything from you. I'm securing our future." I looked at her fingers, soft, manicured, resting on the hands that once built engines and drafted blueprints until they trembled from fatigue. I wanted to believe her. God help me, I did. So I signed. Her face brightened instantly, the way a salesperson smiles when the deal closes. She kissed my cheek, light and perfunctory like an afterthought. "Thank you, Dad. You'll see this is the best thing that ever happened to us." She gathered the papers, slid them into her designer purse, and stood up. Outside, the afternoon light reflected off the hood of the Bentley, scattering white across my living room walls. She paused at the doorway, half-turned, and said, "Charles thinks it's time I take a bigger role. He says I've got his business sense." That sentence hung in the air long after the door closed. I stayed seated, listening to the ticking of the wall clock, the same one her mother used to wind every Sunday. Each click felt like a hammer against my ribs. Half an hour later, I walked out to the porch. The driveway was empty except for tire tracks melting into puddles. The marigolds were gone, the garden bare, waiting for a spring that might never come. I thought about all the times I'd stayed up late balancing the books, the nights her mother cried over unpaid invoices, the mornings we celebrated small victories, like landing one new client. I thought of the day I first put Lydia's name on the company stationery because I wanted her to feel it belonged to her too. Now it did. Legally. Inside the house smelled of dust and coffee. I sat back down at the table and looked at the blank spot where the folder had been. My pen still lay there, ink smudged on the edge of the page. I whispered into the stillness, not sure if I was praying or pleading. If faith means anything, Lord, give me eyes to see what's hidden beneath her smile. And in that quiet, something inside me shifted, not yet anger, not yet sorrow, but the faint rustle of a storm beginning far away. The storm finally reached me 5 days after the gala. It didn't come with thunder or rain, just an envelope. A thick cream-colored one with the Mallory Holdings logo embossed in gold. It had been slipped under my workshop door, maybe by some intern who didn't want to face me. Inside were quarterly reports, legal notices, and one small, devastating truth my daughter had sold me. 30% of Hale Engineering, my own company, the legacy I'd built over 50 years, had been quietly absorbed into Mallory Holdings. The contract I'd signed for formality had become a weapon, and the buyer was my daughter's husband, Ethan Mallory. The numbers were brutal. The controlling shares had shifted. I was no longer founder and CEO. Now in the company database, my title read, Consultant, no salary listed, no authority attached. The official reason, transition to new leadership model. I sat at my desk for a long time, hands flat on the wood that had known decades of blueprints, coffee rings, and late-night problem-solving. Then I opened my computer. Emails filled the screen, most unread. Memos from people who used to report to me, now CCing Ethan. The first one that made my pulse stop came from Lydia herself. Dad's getting tired, she'd written to the board. He doesn't understand the vision we're building. This merger will give us credibility, and once the paperwork clears, we can rebrand Hale Engineering into Mallory Manufacturing. He'll get over it. Get over it! That's what she wrote about the man who'd carried this company through every recession, every lost client, every sleepless night. My cursor hovered over the trash icon, but I didn't delete it. I printed it. Then printed 5 more. One from Ethan to Lydia. Once your father steps back, we'll have full decision rights. Investors prefer the Mallory name anyway. He's old-fashioned, but he served his purpose. Another from her assistant. Your dad still thinks this was his idea. Genius move, Lydia. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips, steady and dangerous. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at the company logo at the top of each email. My name, once a badge of pride, now looked like graffiti on someone else's empire. I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked through the factory floor. The machines were silent. Production paused for restructuring. Dust settled on the steel frames like snow. The echo of old workmen's laughter haunted the empty space. Men who'd trusted me with their livelihoods, men I'd promised stability. Now their jobs, their pensions were in the hands of a couple who treated legacy like a brand campaign. On a workbench near the wall, I found an old photograph under a cracked clipboard. Lydia, age 12, wearing my hard hat, smiling, grease on her cheeks. She used to say, "Someday I'll run this place, Dad." And she was right. Just not like this. That night I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just opened every document I had: tax filings board, minutes, ownership transfers. I mapped every name connected to Mallory Holdings. By dawn, I understood the scale of their plan. Lydia wasn't marrying up. She was merging up, transforming my family's sweat into the Mallory brand's next acquisition. At 6:00 a.m., I brewed black coffee and stared out the window. as the first shift of factory workers arrived only to find the gates locked. I saw confusion in their faces, men in oil-stained overalls, women carrying lunch pails. One of them, Frank, knocked on my car window. "Mr. Hale, they said you retired." That true retired. That word hurt worse than betrayal. It sounded like erasure. I nodded slowly. "Not yet, Frank. Not just yet." After he left, I sat there in silence, my breath fogging the windshield. Then I reached for the small recorder I kept in the glove box, a habit from the old days when I dictated project notes. That morning I pressed record and said, "This is Brian Hale. And if anyone finds this, let them know I built this company with integrity, not greed. My daughter and her husband stole it. But I'm going to take it back." I turned off the recorder, set it on the seat beside me, and drove toward the city. Some men fight with fists, some fight with lawyers. But I'd spent a lifetime building machines that could carry the weight of bridges, and I knew one thing: when a structure collapses, it's always from the inside. And I'd just found the crack. 3 nights after I found those emails, I invited them to dinner. I told Lydia over the phone that I'd cooked her favorite meal, rosemary lamb stew, the one her mother used to make when she came home from college. There was a pause on the line. Then her voice softened just for a second. "Dad, that sounds lovely. Ethan and I will stop by around 7. I hung up and looked around my kitchen, small, warm, filled with ghosts. The old ceramic plates, the uneven wooden table, the faint smell of motor oil that never quite left my hands. It wasn't much compared to their penthouse, but it was mine. By 6, I'd set the table with the best I had: 2 candles, real silverware, and napkins that had seen better days. A faint drizzle tapped against the windows as headlights flashed across the driveway. When the Bentley pulled up, I saw them through the curtains, Lydia in a tailored navy dress, Ethan in a gray suit that looked hand-stitched. They looked like an advertisement for victory. "Dad," she said brightly when I opened the door, air kissing my cheek, as if the scent of hard work might stain her. "This place hasn't changed a bit. No reason to fix what still works," I said. Ethan handed me a bottle of imported wine Bordeaux, maybe $200 a glass. "For the man who built a legacy," he said, smiling too wide. We sat. I served the food, they complimented the seasoning, and for 20 minutes we played the game, the polite, hollow ritual of family. Then, as the meal slowed, Ethan leaned back in his chair. "So Brian, about the merger, Lydia's been doing incredible work. The board says Hale's productivity will double once the Mallory integration finalizes." I set my fork down. Integration, I thought it was a partnership. Lydia dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin. "Dad, it's just business language. Nothing changes, not for you anyway." "Except my name on the door," I said quietly. Her eyes flickered quick as a blade. "Dad, let's not make this emotional. You'll still be honored as founder emeritus. You'll even get a plaque." A plaque. 50 years of labor, and they'd offer me a piece of metal for the wall. Ethan chuckled, raising his glass. "We're keeping the Hale name in small print under the new brand. It adds authenticity. Old American heritage. People love that." I stared at the candlelight reflecting off the crystal glasses, and for a moment I saw my wife's face in the flicker. She would have smiled politely through the humiliation, the same way she did when creditors called after Lydia's first failed business venture. She'd always said, "Let her learn by falling." But this wasn't falling. This was theft disguised as ambition. "Tell me," I said, keeping my tone calm, What does founder emeritus earn these days? Silence. Then Ethan smiled again, that smooth, empty smile. You won't need to worry about money. The company's in good hands now. Lydia placed her hand over his, a gesture meant to look affectionate. Dad, you should rest. You've done enough. I studied her, the diamond earrings catching the candlelight, the flawless nails, the posture of someone who believed she'd already won. For a brief, painful second, I saw the child she once was, hair tangled from the workshop, holding blueprints upside down, laughing when I called her my lucky charm. And then she was gone again, replaced by the woman sitting across from me, polished, proud, and poisonous. I nodded slowly. You're right. I have done enough. We finished dinner. They stood, thanked me for the meal, promised to visit more often. I walked them to the door, watching Lydia slip her hand into Ethan's arm, as if that was where she'd always belonged. When the Bentley's taillights disappeared into the rain, I turned back to the table. The candles were still burning, soft, golden, almost forgiving. I reached under the table and pulled out the small voice recorder I'd placed beneath it before they arrived. The red light blinked steadily. Every word, the arrogance, the confession, the insult was there. I placed it gently beside the empty wine glasses. My reflection stared back from the dark window, a tired old man, but one who'd just taken back control. They thought I was sentimental. They thought I'd go quietly. But I wasn't the man they remembered. I was the man who built bridges strong enough to hold trucks, storms, and lies. And I was done letting people cross mine for free. I whispered into the quiet. You taught me greed, Lydia. Now I'll teach you consequence. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, not loud yet, but near enough. If you're still here, type 1 in the comments. Let's see who's still following this father's fight. When you build machines for a living, you learn two things. One, pressure always finds the weakest weld. And two, silence is more powerful than force. So I stayed silent. Not because I was broken, but because I wanted them to believe I was. For 3 weeks, I let the world think Brian Hale had retired. I stopped going to the office, stopped answering calls, even let the mailbox overflow. Lydia's assistant sent me a card that said, "Enjoy your golden years." I pinned it to my refrigerator door like a battle flag. But every morning, I woke up at 5:30, just like always, brewed black coffee, and drove to my lawyer's office in Newark. Her name was Angela Cruz, mid-30s, sharp, steady eyes, the kind of person who doesn't waste words. She'd worked for me as an intern years ago before going out on her own. When I told her what happened, she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned forward and said, "Mr. Hale, they used your trust as leverage, but you built this company under a founder's charter, right?" I nodded. Drafted it myself in '89. She smiled, the first smile I'd seen in weeks. Then they've already lost. It turned out the original charter included a small clause buried deep in the bylaws, the founder's veto. It gave me the right to revoke any transfer of shares made under misrepresentation or breach of moral intent. Lydia and Ethan hadn't just lied to me. They'd used company funds to host that gala, a personal branding stunt disguised as charity, that Angela said was fraud. We started building the case, quietly. Every document, every transaction, every self-congratulatory email Lydia sent became a brick in the wall. I was rebuilding one that would trap them inside when the time came. Angela worked nights. I paid her from a separate account, one Lydia didn't know existed. It was an old contingency fund I'd opened decades ago in my wife's name. She used to call it our rainy day jar. Well, the storm had arrived. Meanwhile, the newspapers were filled with glossy photos of the Mallorys. The power couple revolutionizing American industry, one headline said. There was Lydia standing in front of a red backdrop, her hand resting on Ethan's chest, wearing a watch worth more than my car. I clipped that article and pinned it beside the assistant's Enjoy retirement card. Trophies of arrogance. At night, I drove past the old factory, my factory, and saw new signage being installed. Mallory Manufacturing, a division of Hale Engineering. They hadn't even removed my name entirely, just buried it. The men I'd worked beside for decades, welders, foremen, engineers, had all been replaced by younger hires. When one of them spotted me from the gate, he waved. Mr. Hale. You coming back soon? I didn't answer. Just smiled and said, keep your wrenches oiled, boys. You'll need them again soon. Inside the truck, the old voice recorder blinked red as I replayed snippets from that dinner. Ethan's smug tone, Lydia's corporate condescension, her words, you should rest, Dad. You've done enough. They'd done enough too. One night, I printed out every email, every piece of evidence, and laid them across my dining table. Pages upon pages of deceit underlined in red pen. At the center, I placed a photograph of my wife Grace smiling paint on her hands from the time she helped me paint the first company logo on the workshop door. I looked at her and whispered, they forgot who built this. Angela came by the next morning, bleary-eyed but determined. I've drafted the injunction, she said, placing a stack of documents in front of me. Once we file this, they can't touch a dime of the company's assets until a hearing. But if you really want this to land, Mr. Hale, you need to make the truth public. Public. That word tasted strange. For decades, I'd avoided the spotlight. Lydia was the face, I was the foundation. But maybe it was time to let people see who'd been holding the weight all along. I poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. Then we'll make it public. But not with anger, with facts. She grinned. That's your engineer brain talking. No, I said quietly. That's a father's heart, one that's done being used as someone else's stepping stone. When she left, I sat at the table again and looked at the blueprint of the company I'd designed 50 years ago. Every line, every measurement was drawn by hand. Back then, I thought I was building machines. Now I realized I'd been building a legacy, and it was time to defend it, not for money, but for meaning. The silence was over. The retaliation had begun. The morning of the conference dawned gray and heavy, like the sky already knew what was coming. The New York Investors Forum, an annual showcase of America's brightest business dynasties, was being held in the glass atrium of the Mallory Tower. 500 guests, reporters, investors, cameras, and at the center of the stage, my daughter and her husband. Their names were printed in gold on the program. Ethan and Lydia Mallory, Reimagining Legacy, How Innovation Outgrows Tradition. I arrived early wearing my best navy suit, the one I hadn't worn since Grace's funeral. My tie trembled slightly in my hands as I adjusted it in the restroom mirror. Not fear focus. Angela waited in the lobby holding a briefcase that contained everything signed: affidavits, emails, financial statements, the fraudulent Gala receipts. She squeezed my shoulder gently. Once you start, don't stop. Speak plain, speak truth. I've spent 72 years building plain things, I said. Bridges don't lie, and neither will I. When Lydia and Ethan took the stage, applause filled the atrium. They looked flawless, the embodiment of power. Behind them, a massive screen displayed their new logo, Mallory Manufacturing, formerly Hale Engineering. That was the moment I stood up. At first, no one noticed the old man walking toward the front. But when I stepped beneath the stage lights, silence rippled through the crowd like a chill wind. The spotlight shifted, and Lydia's smile faltered. "Sir, this portion of the event is closed," the moderator stammered. I held up a thick folder. "Then you'll want to keep it open." Ethan tried to take the microphone. "Dad, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," I said, my voice steady. "Because you made your success standing on my name. Now let's tell the truth about how you built it." I turned to the crowd. For 50 years, Hale Engineering served the city. We built bridges, elevators, steel frames, things that last longer than applause. I founded that company with my late wife and my own hands, and I trusted my daughter to carry it forward. Gasps scattered across the room as I opened the folder. "These," I said, lifting a stack of papers, "are records showing how my daughter and her husband used company funds over $500,000 to finance their Gala and personal brand campaign. They called it charity. It was theft." The projector behind them flickered. Angela, standing in the tech booth, connected the drive we'd prepared. On the massive screen, the evidence appeared: the emails, the voice recordings, the bank transfers, Lydia's own words echoing through the speakers. "Dad still thinks this was his idea. Genius move. Once he's out, we'll merge and rebrand." The audience murmured, whispers growing like a storm. Ethan lunged forward, shouting, "This is slander." But Angela raised a hand, holding up the notarized injunction. "Actually, it's a federal filing, filed at 8:15 this morning." I looked straight at Lydia. "Sweetheart, you told me to rest." But real builders don't rest while others tear down their work. You sold integrity for influence. And you forgot one thing: I designed every foundation in that company. You can't move what you didn't build." Lydia's face drained of color. Reporters started taking photos. Cameras zoomed in. The sound of clicking shutters was deafening. "I didn't come here to destroy you," I said finally. "I came here to remind you that money doesn't erase blood, and that truth will outlast every brand, every name, every tower built on lies." Then I added softly for the whole room to hear, "You can buy applause, but you can't buy integrity. And God sees every number you falsify." The crowd went still. No one moved, not even the moderator. For the first time in years, I felt something deeper than anger, peace, because the truth was free now, and nothing they did could cage it again. Security didn't need to escort me out. I walked away on my own, each step echoing through the marble hall like punctuation at the end of a long, painful chapter. Behind me, chaos erupted. Reporters shouting, investors demanding answers, Ethan's voice cracking as he tried to control the damage. Outside, the cold air hit my face like baptism. I stood beneath the towering building that bore both our names, Mallory and Gold Hale, in fading silver underneath, and I smiled. Maybe they'd erase the silver by tomorrow. Maybe not. But even if they did, everyone inside now knew who'd built the steel that held it up. I whispered into the gray morning, "Thank you, Lord. I didn't raise my voice, but you made sure they heard me." The fallout came faster than even I expected. By Monday morning, every major outlet from the Wall Street Journal to Forbes Digital had picked up the story, "Mallory family under federal review for corporate misappropriation. Charity Gala funds traced to private Mallory account." The photos were everywhere. Lydia's perfect smile frozen mid-speech, Ethan's face twisting as I held the folder open. The headlines didn't call it betrayal. They called it justice. By Tuesday, the board of Mallory Holdings had convened an emergency meeting. By Wednesday, Lydia's PR license was suspended pending investigation. By Friday, the penthouse she'd boasted about the $12 million view of Manhattan was up for sale to cover the mounting legal costs. And through it all, I said nothing. The same press that had once ignored the old man in the back row now begged for interviews. One even showed up at my doorstep with a camera crew. "Mr. Hale, how does it feel to see your daughter's empire collapse?" I looked him in the eye and said it wasn't hers to begin with. The clip went viral, not because I sounded triumphant, but because I didn't. In the weeks that followed, Hale Engineering officially retracted from Mallory Holdings. The injunction Angela filed forced their accountants to open every ledger, every off-book transfer, every consulting expense. The deeper they dug, the worse it got. Turns out the Mallorys hadn't just stolen from me. They'd used shell accounts to divert investor funds into personal luxury purchases, a yacht designer collections, private retreats. The SEC froze their assets within days. When Ethan's father, Charles Mallory, realized what his son and daughter-in-law had done, he publicly denounced them. Their actions were not in alignment with our family's values. Translation: they embarrassed us on television. Lydia and Ethan vanished from the headlines for a while, hiding somewhere in Connecticut, I heard. But damage of that scale doesn't heal. Not when your last name becomes synonymous with scandal. Meanwhile, Angela and I worked to rebuild what they'd tried to destroy. The court granted me back full ownership of Hale Engineering. The judge's ruling read founder's veto enforced under fraudulent misrepresentation. It was a single paragraph, but it felt like the final sentence in a long, bitter story. I could have sold the company for millions right then, walked away retired in comfort. But comfort wasn't the goal. Legacy was. So I did something my daughter would never have understood. I gave it away. Half of all company profits were redirected to a new foundation, in my wife's name, the Grace Hale Foundation, dedicated to trade school scholarships for working-class kids who couldn't afford college. I told Angela, let's make sure someone else gets a start without selling their soul for it. She smiled. That's the most expensive revenge I've ever seen. Not revenge, I said. Restoration. The reopening of the company was small, almost quiet, just 30 employees, most of them old-timers who'd been laid off when Lydia restructured everything. When they walked back into the factory, some of them cried. We took down the Mallory manufacturing sign together. Underneath the old paint still read Hale Engineering, faded but strong. That moment, seeing my name still standing after the storm, felt like breathing after years underwater. I stood at the factory floor that night, long after everyone went home, the machines humming again, the smell of oil and metal returning to the air. In that silence, I thought about Lydia, about the little girl who once said, "Daddy, I'll make your name famous." She had. Just not the way either of us intended. But maybe fame isn't the opposite of failure. Maybe it's the test that reveals what a name is made of. I ran my hand along the cool steel of one unfinished frame and whispered, "Grace, it's done. The name's clean again." And for the first time in years, I felt like I could finally go home, lock the door, and rest without wondering what tomorrow would take away. Because the tomorrow they tried to steal was already mine again, not in money, but in meaning. It was late October when the knock came. The wind outside howled down from the Hudson, carrying dry leaves across the porch and rattling the old wind chime Grace had hung 30 years ago. I almost didn't open the door. These days, unexpected knocks meant journalists, lawyers, or opportunists. But when I did, there she was, Lydia. No makeup, no bodyguards, no car waiting at the curb. Her navy coat was wrinkled, her hair pinned carelessly. She looked smaller somehow, as if the air had gone out of her. For the first time in years, I saw the little girl who used to fall asleep in the back seat after her mother's choir practice, head resting on my jacket. "Dad," she said softly. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She crossed the threshold like someone entering a church, slow, hesitant, afraid of being struck by the past. The living room hadn't changed, the same brown couch, the same oil lamp, the same faint smell of coffee and metal. She looked around, eyes flickering over every corner, as if taking inventory of everything she'd traded away. "I didn't know where else to go," she said finally. Her voice cracked on the word else. I nodded toward the couch. "Sit." She sat, clasping her hands together so tightly her knuckles turned white. I could see the tremor in her fingers. "Ethan's gone," she said. "He filed for divorce. The lawyers say I might lose everything. My accounts are frozen, Dad. I can't even pay the rent." There it was, the confession. Not of guilt, but of need. I sat across from her, the low lamp casting shadows between us like a boundary. "What do you want me to do?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. "I don't know. I thought maybe her voice broke, maybe you could help me, just until things settle down." I studied her face. Beneath the exhaustion, there was still that flicker of calculation. "Old habits die hard. Help," I repeated slowly. "Like the way I helped you start your company. Like the way I helped you at the Gala. Like when I signed away 30% of my life's work because you said it was just paperwork." She looked down. "I was wrong, Dad. I was stupid. I thought I was doing the right thing." "No," I said, my voice firm but not loud. "You thought you were doing the easiest thing." There's a difference. Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know who I became. When everything started falling apart, I kept hearing your voice in my head saying, 'Build things that last.' But I did. I took a deep breath. The years of bitterness and grief pressed against my chest, demanding release. 'You built something,' I said. 'You just built it on borrowed gold. And borrowed gold always burns when the truth touches it.'" Her tears fell then, real ones this time. They left dark stains on her expensive coat. She looked up at me, desperate. "Do you hate me? Do?" I shook my head. "No, Lydia. I've loved you longer than you've known what that word costs. But I can't save you from what you built. The only thing left for you to rebuild now is yourself." She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "I sold the last thing I had, Mom's necklace. I wanted to repay you for what I took." I looked at the envelope, then at her trembling hands. "You can't repay what you stole, sweetheart. You can only redeem it." She blinked, confused. "What does that mean?" "It means stop trying to buy forgiveness," I said gently. "It's not for sale." For a long moment we just sat there, the only sound the ticking of the old clock above the mantel. Then she whispered, "I don't deserve you." "No," I said. "You deserve the truth. And the truth is, I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean I'll let you back into the house that easily." You'll have to earn your way through the door again." Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time in a decade, I saw humility where there used to be pride. When she stood to leave, she hesitated at the doorway, her hand on the frame. "Dad, will you pray for me?" I swallowed hard. "Every night." Then I added softly, "Maybe someday you'll start praying for yourself." The door clicked shut behind her. The wind carried the last of the leaves across the porch, swirling in the lamplight, before vanishing into the dark. I stood there for a long time, hands still on the knob, the echo of her footsteps fading down the street. It didn't feel like victory anymore. It felt like something quieter, mercy wrapped in grief. And maybe that's what faith looks like after 70 years, not vengeance, not triumph, but the courage to forgive without forgetting. Winter came early that year. The air smelled of iron and snow, the same smell I remembered from the winter I built my first workshop with Grace. Back then, my hands were strong, my dreams heavier than the steel beams we welded. Now at 72, my hands shook a little when I buttoned my shirt. But I didn't mind. They had earned that tremor. It was the tremor of a man who had carried weight and set it down. The morning of the reopening, I stood outside the factory gates that once bore someone else's name. The new sign gleamed in the pale sunlight. Hale Engineering, a division of the Grace Hale Foundation. Not for profit, not for legacy, but for purpose. 30 of my oldest employees had come back. Frank, the foreman, who once asked if I'd retired, was standing beside me with his helmet tucked under his arm, eyes wet. "I never thought I'd see this place alive again, Mr. Hale." I smiled. Neither did I. But sometimes things that die need a winter before they bloom again. We cut the ribbon, nothing fancy, no reporters, no champagne. Just honest applause from calloused hands. When the machines roared back to life, the sound filled the factory like a hymn. The vibration trembled through the walls, up through the floor, into my chest, the heartbeat of something resurrected. I walked through the aisles, greeting each worker by name, shaking hands still rough from labor. There were new faces, too, scholarship students from trade schools we'd begun sponsoring. Kids with hungry eyes, the kind who wanted to build something that would outlast them. A young woman approached me, maybe 19, wearing a safety vest 2 sizes too big. "Mr. Hale," she said shyly, "I just wanted to thank you. The foundation paid my tuition. My dad's a mechanic. He cried when he heard I got accepted." I felt my throat tighten. "You don't owe me thanks," I told her. "Just promise me you'll build something that stands." She nodded, grinning, and ran off to join the others. That moment, more than the injunctions, more than the headlines, was when I realized what real victory looked like. Not humiliation, not revenge, but restoration. That afternoon, I hosted a small gathering in the break room, sandwiches, black coffee, and laughter echoing off the steel beams. Angela showed up, hair tied back, carrying folders as usual. "You did it," she said. "The company's profitable again, even after all the settlements." I chuckled. "Don't remind me how much we paid those lawyers." She handed me a small envelope. "You might want to see this." Inside was a letter from the city council, an invitation to receive a Founder's Merit Award for lifetime contributions to American infrastructure. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my whole life avoiding attention, and now they wanted to put me on a stage. "I'm not doing this for applause," I said. Angela smiled knowingly. "I know. But you should let people see that decency still wins sometimes." That night, after everyone left, I walked the empty factory one last time. The concrete floor gleamed under the dim security lights. Dust motes drifted like memory. In the far corner, the old office where Grace used to keep our records still had her handwriting on the wall, the faded chalk. Quote she wrote the week we opened, "Build with honesty or don't build at all." I ran my fingers across the words. For decades I thought those were just her ideals. Now I knew they were blueprints. I sat down on the bench near the loading dock and watched the snow begin to fall through the open gate. The flakes settled on the railings, the machines, the sign with my name, and I thought about the long road here: betrayal, humiliation, revelation, forgiveness. If I'd taken revenge for its own sake, I might have won faster. But dignity doesn't rush. It returns in silence, like the first snow, soft, certain, unstoppable. The next morning, we'd start full production again. But for that one night, I just sat there listening to the hum of the machines, feeling Grace's presence in the warmth of the air. And I whispered to the quiet factory, "This isn't revenge, my love. This is redemption." Because sometimes the sweetest sound isn't applause. It's the hum of something honest coming back to life. It was Sunday morning, cold and clean. A thin layer of frost covered the sidewalks, making the world shimmer like it was made of glass. I woke up before sunrise, brewed a small pot of coffee, and stared out the kitchen window. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of unfinished business. The silence in the house wasn't emptiness anymore. It was peace. I drove to St. Andrew's Chapel, the same small church Grace and I used to attend when money was tight and faith was all we could afford. The wooden pews creaked the same way they always had. The smell of candle wax and old hymn books filled the air. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass window, scattering colors across the floor like confetti. I sat in the third pew on the left, our pew. Grace used to hum quietly during the hymns, never loud, just enough for me to hear. Today I could almost catch that tune in the faint sound of the organ warming up. The pastor, a man half my age, gave a sermon about redemption through endurance. His words drifted over me like water smoothing rough stone. Faith, he said, isn't about asking God to prevent storms. It's trusting Him enough to walk through one. I smiled, because I'd walked through mine barefoot, bleeding, but still standing. After service, a few congregants stopped me to shake my hand. They'd seen the headlines, of course. "You showed real grace, Mr. Hale," one woman said. I thanked her, but inside I knew the truth. Grace showed me real grace long before any of this began. She'd believed in me when we were just two kids patching machines in a rented garage, praying the bank wouldn't take the house. When everyone left, I stayed behind. The church was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock above the altar. I walked up to the front, knelt at the communion rail, and bowed my head. "Lord," I whispered, "I don't know why you gave me a second chance at this age. Maybe so I'd finally learn that forgiveness is heavier than revenge and worth more than gold." The words came slowly, but each one felt like it had waited decades to be said. When I left the chapel, the sky had turned a brilliant blue. I drove to the factory not to check on production, but to sit one last time in the office that had once been mine. The desk was empty now, except for a photograph of Grace holding Lydia as a baby. Her face glowed with pride and hope, the kind of light you don't see in boardrooms. I sat there tracing the frame with my thumb, remembering every version of the woman I loved. The one who painted our first logo by hand, who kept the books at night while I welded through dawn, who told me legacy isn't money, Ray. its mercy passed down through work. I realized then that everything I'd done, the confrontation, the lawsuits, the rebuilding, wasn't really about vengeance or even justice. It was about protecting the meaning of that word, legacy. There was a soft knock on the office door. Angela stood there holding a small white envelope. "From your daughter," she said. Inside was a handwritten note, shaky, uneven ink. "Dad, I don't expect you to forget, but I hope someday you'll believe I'm trying. I started volunteering at a shelter. They needed someone to help with PR. It's not a paycheck, but it's something real. Thank you for not giving up on me. Love, Lydia." I stared at the letter for a long time. Maybe it was just words. Maybe it was more. Either way, it was the first thing she'd written to me without asking for money. Angela smiled. "Seems like she's learning." "Maybe she's remembering," I said quietly. She nodded and left me alone. I stood, took the photo of Grace and Lydia, and placed it on the windowsill. The late afternoon light poured through the glass landing right on their faces. For a second, it looked like the two of them were smiling at each other again. I walked outside and locked the office door behind me. The wind carried the scent of oil and snow, the sound of machinery humming steady and strong. Men and women were working building under a name that meant something again. As I stood by the gate, I whispered to the wind, "Grace, it's done." I kept the name clean. The sun dipped behind the city skyline, painting everything gold. I thought of Lydia somewhere out there, maybe staring at the same sky, maybe whispering her own prayer. I hoped she'd finally learned that redemption doesn't come from applause or from winning back what you lost. It comes from owning the pain you caused and choosing to be better than yesterday. I started walking back toward the truck. The world was quiet except for the faint toll of the church bell in the distance, steady, calm, familiar. Before climbing in, I looked back one last time at the sign above the gates, Hale Engineering, a division of the Grace Hale Foundation. That name would stay long after I was gone. Not as a monument to pride, but as proof that the truth once spoken can outlast betrayal. And as the engine started, I whispered my final prayer, "Thank you, Lord, for strength, for grace, for the chance to finish well." Because faith, I've learned, isn't something you carry to survive the storm. It's what you find when the storm finally ends and you're still standing. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to Brian's Story, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every story of redemption keeps this community alive, because sometimes all it takes to heal is hearing that someone else made it through.